Hello and welcome to another video. One of my favorite dishes from Indonesia is called Mie Ayam. Mie means noodles and ayam means chicken. These are chicken noodle bowls. They're delicious. You can find them in a lot of different booths and you can make them at home, but they're pretty complicated. So I've decided to do a three-part series on how to make these at home. Now, first part, which we'll be doing today, is about the noodles themselves. These are not like pasta, and there's nothing that's quite the same that you can get in the store, at least in the US or here in Europe. So we'll talk a lot about how to make the noodles, and that'll be the video today. The next video I do will be about the chicken and the broth, and we'll go ahead and look at that. To tell you the truth, the chicken and the broth were the hardest part for me. It took about 5 years figuring that part out, so hopefully this will save you some time. And then on the final one, we'll put it all together, we'll do the final cooking and show you the presentation. At any rate, I hope you really enjoy this. This is a delicious dish. It does take a bit of time to cook, so make sure that you have time planned out if you decide to attempt this. So, the noodles. In this case, we're going to make what's called Mie Lebar. We could also make Mie Keriting, or we could make Mie Ayam. These are different kinds of noodles in the same way that, for example, spaghetti, fettuccine, and penne are all different. They're different not so much in the type of flour used, but in the shapes and textures that you get with them. As I say, today we're going to make Mie Lebar, and this is going to be delicious. So before we get started, if you've had Asian noodles like ramen, you know they're not pasta. They have a different flavor, different texture. This is because they're made with different ingredients and in a different way. So we're going to go ahead and get that part started. Ramen is not quite the same as these noodles though. They're very similar, but these are kind of like a ramen, but also an egg noodle. So they have eggs, but like ramen, they also have alkaline. Pardon the sound of the airplanes passing overhead. This is something which you can do by yourself. It's not that hard. It's a little easier if you have a noodle roller, but I don't have that, so I'm just going to use a rolling pin. But we'll go over all this. Next will be the ingredients. And so here we have our ingredients. I'm going to use half a kilogram of flour, so I haven't weighed this out yet. Now, in German terms, I'm using a type 550, a type 550 flour. This is a bread flour. In the US, you would use a high gluten bread flour. That's basically what this is. And this will give the noodles a nice chewy texture. I'm going to add 3 eggs. As I say, these are egg noodles. I'm going to use this natron, which is sodium bicarbonate, to make my alkali. I'm not going to add this directly in. I'm going to cook it first. We'll get to that in a moment. And then as I roll it, I will dust everything with starch, and this is basically cornstarch. In Indonesia, they would use tapioca flour, which is basically tapioca starch, but cornstarch works just as well, and it's fine. There's no problem substituting that. I may also have to add a small amount of water, and if I do that, I will add a small amount of salt, but we probably won't have to do that. So we're going to start by weighing out 500 grams of flour. Of course, we start by setting up the tare on the scale with whatever container we're using. I use a fairly large bowl for this. The reason will become fairly clear. And I'm going to take my flour, and I'm going to dump it in slowly until I get to the 500 gram mark. Well, 501, 500, close enough. I guess I could spoon a little bit out, but I don't think it's important. Anyway, this is close enough. We'll go ahead and get started. The next thing I'm going to do is I am going to bake this Kaiser natron. So I'll show you that in just a moment. Now in Indonesia, they use something called abu air to make these noodles. Abu air literally means ash water. So this would be the same sort of thing you'd use if you make soap. And similar alkalis are used in most Asian noodles, including ramen. Now the difficulty here is I wasn't able to find any food grade lye or any abu air, so we're going to make our own. Now you'll see here 5 grams. This is 1 teaspoon. And I'm going to bake this at basically 350 Fahrenheit or 180, or actually 150 Celsius, so about 300 or 150 Celsius. And I'm going to go ahead and bake that for an hour. And what's going to happen is the sodium bicarbonate is going to break down and it's going to become sodium carbonate. Now, if I dissolve this in water by itself, it has a pH of 8. So what's going to happen here is we're going to go ahead and bake this. It's going to go from 5 grams to 3 grams. It's going to lose about 40% of its weight, but it's going to become much, much stronger. At that point, it's actually going to be a little bit caustic. We have to be a little careful about how we handle it, but it's nothing to worry about. And keep in mind, we use food grade lye in a lot of things, including pretzels. So really, at the end of the day, this is, you know, the same relationship to Italian pasta as pretzels have to breadsticks. So now we have the baked soda out of this, and you're going to see it weighs in right at 3 grams. Now, what I usually do here is I take a small glass, put just a little bit of water on the bottom, and I'm going to pour this in. And if you listen to it, you can hear it fizzing a little bit. What's happening is that sodium carbonate is dissolving. It's actually carbonating the water a little bit. That's why it's called sodium carbonate, I guess. Or it's, I guess, one of the reasons why carbonation is called carbonation. But yeah, this is fizzing, and in a couple minutes it will be it'll be clear. In the meantime, I'm going to take my 3 eggs and I'm going to break them into this bowl, and I'm going to beat them together very nicely. Now, you can see this has not fully stirred in yet. I'm going to spin it around a bit. I want to kind of get this sort of reasonably dissolved, but you can see how much better that's doing over time. Now, as a very basic small word of caution, this is relatively caustic, so you want to kind of avoid getting it in this shape on your hands. If you do, just kind of wash it off pretty quickly. It's not super dangerous. Also, really don't get it in your eyes, and if you do, flush it with water like for 15 minutes straight. Then call for emergency help. Alright, I think this is about ready. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly pour this in. And you're going to watch and you're going to be able to see a color change with the eggs. Look at that color change. Our eggs went from creamy and yellow to orange and translucent. Quite amazing. Try to get that last little bit off out of the bottom. Yeah, we're going to do that quite like that. That'll be fine. Now I'm going to take my flour. I'm going to pour this egg mixture into it very slowly. I'm going to stir it with my fork. I'm going to work the flour into the eggs with my fork until I get a kind of an even consistency. The reason for doing it that way is it's just about saving your hands a bit. You could use your fingers, but then it will stick to your fingers. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Now, if it refuses to ball up, then I'll add a bit more water, and I may need to do that. Yeah, I'm gonna have to add some water. But before I add the water, usually what I'm going to do is I'm going to crumble this up, and I'm going to try to set this up so that it's slightly more uniform consistency. That's not super important, but I find that it makes the next step a little bit easier. Okay, now this is looking like a nice, even consistency. I'm gonna pour just a little bit of water in, toss it briefly, and then I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna see it starts to ball up, but not all the way there yet. The reason I try to kind of like break it down at this point is that I just find that it's easier when it all kind of balls up together rather than when you're trying to work in that last little bit. I think that beats about the same. And it seems like about the right amount. Still just a little bit. I might have to add a little more water. I'm going to add a little more water. Just rinse this last little bit of this egg out. And then from here it should be pretty much just a matter of working it all together. Okay. So from here, we're going to knead it aggressively. If there are sticky portions, you can kind of fold them in. This is going to take about 10 minutes. I'll come back and you can see what the dough looks like when it's fully kneaded. So I've now been kneading it for a while, and it's gone from being sticky to being very rubbery, and definitely not sticky at all. So I'm going to knead it for a little bit longer, then I'm going to let it sit and rest. And then I will come back and actually form the dough sheets and make the noodles. Now, Mie Lebar, the easiest way to make it is like you would a tagliatelle, where you roll a very thin sheet of pasta, roll it up, and cut it into coils with a knife, and then just undo those. So as I keep kneading this, it gets softer and more rubbery. One word for this, one word for a kind of noodle made out of this dough is mie karet, which literally means rubber band noodle. And that gives you a pretty good idea of what the dough ends up being like as it gets fully kneaded. So we're going to do it past when it's soft and when it starts to toughen up again. Once it starts to toughen up again, we're done. And again, it's like a big ball of rubber now. So we're going to let this sit for like about 5 minutes. And that's our dough. Now, if we make this up ahead of time, the dough is going to oxidize and darken kind of a greenish brown. That's fine. It's the same color as the noodles if you buy them from a fresh noodle maker. Typically they will have oxidized also already. So now I've cut that ball of dough into 4 pieces. This would be 4 servings. Now it's very easy if you have extras and you're tossing them with cornstarch to just put them in a bag and put them in the freezer, and they'll be fine to cook later. So don't be afraid to make too much. It's I mean, the portions that I came up with here are easy to control, so I would recommend that. So I can make a ball out of this. I'm actually going to use a rolling pin, and I'm going to come back when I have a nice sheet of pasta. So you don't need to watch me. You don't need to watch me roll this all the way, but you can see me get started. If you have a pasta roller, that would be nice. So here we have a very nice thin sheet of dough, and so I'm gonna roll it up, and you can roll it either direction, but I think it's easier to work with when we have longer noodles. So we're gonna roll it lengthwise. And then I'm going to take my knife and I'm just going to slice this. Now keep in mind, as I've been rolling it, I've been dusting it in this cornstarch, and that means that these won't stick together. In Indonesia, as I mentioned, they use tapioca flour, which is basically the same thing. And then if we take these, See, we have nice long noodles. And we have our Mie Lebar. Mie Lebar means wide noodle. And there's basically a portion of noodles. We'll come back. So we'll come back for the next one in this series when we will talk about how to cook the chicken and the broth, and then finally we'll come back and we'll put it all together. And so there we have Mie Lebar. Now the difference between Mie Lebar, Mie Keriting, and Mie Ayam is mostly the size and shape of the noodles. Mie Keriting's small, roughly the dimensions of a small cross-section of a rubber band. Mie Ayam has a square cross-section and it's much thicker. Mie Lebar, like this, is wide, but it's also a very thin sheet of pasta that it comes from, or not pasta, dough that it comes from. These are really, really, really. They're not that hard to make. Just make sure that you have the right materials, and from there you can go ahead and make them. They're delicious. Come back for the second part, and we'll talk about the broth and the chicken.